Hello and welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. The transfer window is over, deadline day is past, Middlesbrough are still unbeaten, but for this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Northern Echo writer, former Gazette writer. Everyone knows who it is already, I'm sure you've seen on screen, and also podcast star as well now, Dom. Dom Shaw, quite the introduction, and funnily enough, my former lecturer as well, for those of you that don't know that.
That should have been first, mate. That should have been yeah, thanks for having me. No, thanks for having me, mate. Really appreciate it. And great work throughout the summer window. It was a busy one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was. And I mean, to be honest, as I'm sure we'll get into, a lot busier of a final week than I guess most people kind of
Mm.
expected. And I mean, what me and Nathan would usually do in terms of the podcast, obviously, we always upload on a Monday night, so it would be a week on, so slightly later this week. But obviously, from the perspective of where me and Nathan left it, there's actually been so much more gone on. Just to kind of as a start point before we go into the outs, the ins, and I guess the kind of full transfer window as a whole. In this last week since our last episode, you've had the confirmation of Matt Targett and Cali Sen. You've also had the addition of David Strellik. John McLaughlin has joined, a little bit of a surprise one there. And then also we had Alan Brown confirmed on loan from Sunderland. I mean, just before we, as I say, look at the transfer window as a whole, it kind of all unfolded. There's obviously been outgoings, but we'll get onto as well. But the last week of the window, I think a lot of people, because of the wins and because of the momentum, were already very happy. But I think if you look at it from, as I say, just as a kind of timestamp, if you go back a week and then think of everything that's happened since, and obviously deadline day, Middlesbrough have put themselves in a very, very strong position and made their window look even more impressive in the space of only a couple of days, really.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I think Boro got to the stage where the David Strellich signing, for all we know that Strellich was a top target in January, top target again this summer, we know all that. But it actually got to the stage where his signing actually felt like a bonus,
Yeah,
because it came in after the Cali Sen signing. And it was my colleague Scott who obviously brought the story in the middle of last week that Boro were closing in on the signing of Cali Sen, but then we're also still very much in the market for another forward. And all the indications then was that there was a confidence that it was going to happen, even though at that stage a deal with Slovan Bratislava hadn't been agreed. That came after their European game on Thursday night, wasn't it? I think. So to get Strelic and Cali Sen, and I thought Sen looked bright. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I thought he looked bright from the bench against Sheffield United on Saturday. But then the signings of the likes of Alan Brown, I think, just kind of sprinkle the fairy dust onto the window. Really, I think Brown's a
yeah.
really good signing. We can get into that. The exits all made sense. Law McCabe loan, I think, suits everyone. Dan Barlasser had to go; he wasn't going to play. So I think even before deadline day, you kind of felt this has now turned into a really, really impressive window for Boro. But when the dust settles on it, you look at it. I mean, we in various comments I'd seen on socials and on YouTube earlier this week saying, what, when was the last time Boro had a window as successful as this one? Fair play, 10 out of 10. I can't fault anything. What a great position to be in, especially against the backdrop of the frustrations of only a couple of months earlier.
It seems a complete lifetime ago. All of those sort of murmurings of, the chairman's ran out of money or lost his ambition, and it's going to have to be sell to buy, and then of course you get to, oh well, certainly with Strelek, a marquee signing, and then of course with the addition of Alan Brown, as you say, an added bonus. I think I described it to someone this week as a cherry on top of the icing. And the response I got back was, no, that was Dan Barlasser leaving. But I mean, I'm not going to be that cutting and harsh on Dan Barlasser. I wish him all the best at Hibs. But yeah, I think just obviously on the ins, in terms of Strelek and Brown, no disrespect to John McLaughlin, but we're not going to spend sort of 10 minutes talking about Boro's new third choice keeper. In terms of Strellik, it's a name that hasn't gone anywhere for almost more or less a year now. And I think a sort of interesting arm to this story is the fact that after January and kind of, I guess, what for me felt like a little bit of the breakdown between the supporters and the club and Michael Carrick, I think it would be fair to say that was fractured towards the end.
Yeah.
And I think part of that come down to January as a whole, really. Obviously, Latilaf went, Kelechi Iheanacho, who somehow got himself a move to Celtic now, coming through the door at that point. And even then, it was very much, well, we've been linked with Strellik. Why is Iheanacho cropped up out of nowhere? I think now that the club have then gone back in for Strellik is very telling in terms of the dynamic of what perhaps is going so right for Middlesbrough now that they've got all these players through the door, and what was going wrong in January in terms of cohesion between recruitment staff, Kieran Scott, the management staff. The fact they've gone back in for Strellik indicates that there is, as I say, I'll use that word again, that cohesion between everyone, that actually this is something where Middlesbrough have looked at it for a long time, eventually got their man. But as I say, it feels like, I don't know if it's because his name's been out there for a while, the pedigree, the fact he's played in the Champions League, but it feels like a marquee signing, doesn't it, Strellik?
Yeah, it absolutely does. The word you use the word cohesion there. The word Edwards uses again and again and again is alignment. There's alignment behind the scenes. He uses it when he's asked specifically about transfers. He uses it when he's maybe asked about something else, but brings the conversation back to transfers. That it is clear, and it has been clear right from the off, right from the kind of on the record and off the record briefings we were getting very much earlier in the summer, that there's always been complete trust in the plan this summer. And Strellich was clearly right at the forefront of the thinking when it came to the plan. Edward said yesterday in that club interview that I thought was really good, that Strellich was put to him very, very early on. Straight away, he gave it the green light. He talked about the extensive work that had gone on from the recruitment team to get that one over the line. And he has been a top target from January. It's no secret that Boro were desperate to sign him in January. He wanted to come in January. Slovan Bratislava were pretty desperate to keep him in January. I mean, there'd have been a deal there at the right price, obviously, but at that stage, they wanted to keep him. And it was obviously complicated from Boro's perspective by the fact the Lat deal didn't go through until late, very late in the window. But coming into the summer, he was always right there at the top of the thinking. And there was an acceptance again that it would likely have to wait. It would likely have to be come late in the window because of Bratislava's European involvement. But the things that were put to me was Strelec was always desperate to move to Boro, and I think that much was clear from his interview with the club, his first interview with the club after he'd signed, and they just thought he was an ideal fit on and off the pitch. His character was a good fit for the dressing room, and then obviously as a player, he's highly rated. And he had, when you look back at his career, he had one tough spell. He had a tough spell in Italy when he went to Spezia, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then went out on loan to Regina, and they were both like difficult spells. But well, from Boro's perspective, they didn't kind of look at that, but they did obviously. But what was more appealing to them was his response to that, really, and how he bounced back from that spell, and the fact that he showed his resilience. And I think there's an acceptance as well. And funnily enough, I was talking to a journalist from Slovakia earlier today, and he was saying this as well. There's an acceptance that move to Italy just came too early. I think Strelic was 20. He'd
Yeah.
had maybe one season playing regularly for Slovan Bratislava, if that. So it came too early. I think he accepts that now. And the word from the guy, I spoke to another guy from Slovakia yesterday who said that Strelic will have come to Boro with feeling like he has a point to prove, feeling like he has to prove that he can be a success out of Slovakia as well as in his homeland. So clearly we have to wait to see him, and he'll have to bide his time, won't he? 'Cause he's not going to go straight to the team at Preston,
I
is he?
did it. I did enjoy that little joke that he made about sort of
Yeah,
not getting in the team due to the form. Yeah, that was that
straight
was
away. But all the signs all the messages are encouraging, aren't they? And clearly there's delight at getting that one through.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I saw some comments. Again, I think BBC spoke to a Slovakian journalist, and it was basically along the lines of, from their perspective, he has outgrown that league. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's a really interesting dynamic. As you say, he's had a move to Europe already that didn't quite work. But I think, playing in the Champions League, playing in European competitions, playing for his country as well, it seems like, I think especially when you look at the forward line that the Middlesbrough now have, and the options with the likes of Nipan, at the moment we've seen sort of two behind Tommy Conway. It's always been, and I think a lot of people have sort of the opinion of, well, the fee and his goal record, because it's so impressive, that he is just a number nine, when actually I think there's very much a world where both Conway, Nipan and Strellik may well play together potentially.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, isn't it? Because in the first half of last season, when Carrick had Latte, Lat, and Conway, it was the message very much then was there's no pecking order. We will judge depending on which game, which opponent, and I suspect it'll be the same because there's three now. Obviously, there's not just two; there's three because there's Cali Sen as well. But we've seen Conway play as a number 10 at times. Cali Sen is versatile, as far as I'm aware, and can move from playing as centre forward to a bit deeper. Strellich is a number 9, clearly, but from what I'm told, his strengths are dropping into the pockets, linking up the play well. So he's not going to be someone who's just going to play on the shoulder. So it will be fascinating to see how it plays out. And that is going to be one of the challenges now for Edwards, isn't it? Making the most of his squad, because it is a squad. You only had to look at the bench at Sheffield United and who was missing
Yeah.
against Sheffield United, and now the players you've brought into the squad since then. So you've got Strellich to add to that, Brown to add to that, McGree to come back. It takes me back to the kind of early Gary Monk days. Clearly, the comparisons of that there aren't many, thankfully. But when you were thinking, well, who's going to miss out on the squad here because the squad was so deep? The problem then was the squad wasn't balanced. Now,
Yeah.
now I think there's a real balance to the squad, and other than maybe right back and left wing back, you look and think where there's real depth of options. But then Alan Brown played right back for Sunderland at the end of last season after Trey Hume got sent off at Bristol City and looked absolutely at home there. I saw Alan Brown play on the left side of the attack at times for Sunderland. He can play everywhere. We've seen Sammy Silvera can play left wing back. Alex Bangura is going to come back from injury. Silvera will be able to move from left to right if needs be. So I don't think Boro have left themselves short anywhere.
Yeah. I think it's something that I did want to get onto in terms of just basically, has this transfer window left any gaps at all? So we can obviously move on to that in a little bit. Just in terms of Brown, you touched on him there, obviously with your coverage for the Northern Echo. Of course, you'll have watched a fair bit of Brown for Sunderland, and I think obviously everyone's aware of his time at Preston as well. From his club interviews, I don't know if it's just the accent or what. I got a little bit of a Roy Keane vibe, to be honest. Some of those walking along the corridor videos, and you're kind of expecting like a jovial one, and you can almost see him thinking, I don't want to make a dick of myself here. I'm going to really think about these answers. But yeah, other than that, again, it's one of those signings, and funnily enough, even when you broke the story, we obviously shared that post, and there was countless Coventry, Blackburn, plenty of other clubs in the Championship that were quoting the tweet saying Middlesbrough have got arguably the best two in the league in midfield, and they've added another that would probably walk into our midfield. I mean, Alan Brown, yes, okay, Borough have got their duo, their pair. But I think in terms of, as you say, his versatility and also the option for Rob Edwards in a game that might need a little bit more steel to go to three midfielders, he's not a sign that's just going to sort of come in and be happy to sit on the bench. This is a signing that, really, really improves Borough's group of midfielders.
100%. And I enjoyed that walk and talk he did. Harry Potter, he said, was his best film. And I sympathise with him on that because my youngest, he's nearly 2, and he's suddenly taken a liking to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And we've watched the first 15 minutes of it
Right.
every night for the last 2 weeks, I think. So I know word for word the first 15 minutes of that Harry Potter film. I'll be watching it again tonight in a few hours' time. But yeah, so I really like that signing. Really good player. He played a big role for Sunderland last season. No, yeah, I'm not talking Dan Neil or Chris Rigg, but he played 22 games and he had a broken leg in there as well, which was a desperately unfortunate incident. I was there at the game when that happened, and he missed 17 games, I think, because of that, but then came back in and played a prominent role at the end. And Regis Labrise talked again and again, on and off the record, about how important Brown was behind the scenes as well as on the pitch. The signing of Brown raised eyebrows at Sunderland last season because Sunderland had a history, really. Their model was signing young players who we'd never heard of, who were deemed to have a big sell on in the future. And in some cases it's worked, in some it hasn't. Eliza Mienda, Star, others like Isaac Lee Hadji and Abdullah Bar, it hasn't worked with. Brown was a change of tack, this experienced player, more than 300 games for Preston. And it was an acknowledgement from Sunderland that they needed more experience. Well, but Boro have always had more of a balanced feel to their recruitment. We've seen this summer that there was a clear desire this summer to bring in players with more experience and steel. I think there was a recognition that Boro lacked steel last year. Alfie Jones, Callum Britton added real experience and nous. But that was the background of Brown signing for Sunderland last year. And really good player for them and really versatile as well. So I saw him play, as I said, he is a midfielder. He's kind of a number 6, a number 8, but he played in the most advanced. It's not really a number 10, but it's the most advanced of the midfield 3 that Labrise plays regularly. I saw him on the left side of the attack. He covered it right back. He's really, really versatile. And as you say, I mean, he is going to have to come in and sit on the bench to start with because Boro do have the best midfield too in Morris and Hackney. But he is not a player who's going to come here thinking, if I can make 10 appearances and feature regularly from the bench, he'll come here and will want to play a prominent role. And he'll come here, 30-year-old, I think he is. He'll come here thinking, I'm maybe here now trying to play for my last big contract, if I can get a 2-3-year contract out of this. Because if Sunderland stay up, then he's clearly not going to have a role to play there moving forward. Hopefully Boro go up this season, and then you see where things stand next summer. But I think that has the feel of a really, really shrewd signing. I think we'll look back on that later in the season as being a really, really important bit of business.
Yeah, I mean, even look, it's not a Johnny Howson replacement. I'm certainly not saying that. But even in terms of you look at the back end of last season, and Johnny Howson's Middlesbrough career was virtually over at that point. And then what did he play? The last 10 games? You just never know. And to bring someone like that into the midfield, as you say, can fill in at right back or potentially more advanced. It feels like throughout Middlesbrough's summer, as you say, there was obviously that wait, but it's definitely been one of those windows where you say it was absolutely worth the wait for kind of the way it's ended. In terms of incomings, obviously, as you mentioned, we've seen Cali Sen at the weekend as well as Matt Targett, who got an assist. Just obviously with the confirmation of those since our last podcast, again, it feels like slightly different type of signings, but 2 signings that we've become used to under Kieran Scott and this recruitment team. On one side, you've got Matt Targett, who Premier League loans, I think any team that is successful in the Championship, they always make use of the Premier League loan market. And perhaps, not like Ben Doak, a player getting his first senior football, but with Matt Targett, someone that is coming here who has, I think there's a little bit of a misconception, in all honesty, with him that he's kind of been out injured for a full year. That's not the case, actually. And I know you spoke about this with Scott on You Are My Borough, but actually it's more down to just trying to get into a team that is competing for the Champions League, who you've got multiple England internationals in front of you, and barring the eczema flare-up as well. But it's not a case of Matt Targett has been injured and, he's come to Borough to, like Iheanacho was, for example, with 3 games played in his last season and a bucket load of injury problems that he's probably carrying as well. Matt Targett is coming here again, and I used a couple of Sheffield United signings under Chris Wilder last season when me and Nathan first discussed the link, and I said, this is one of those signings where if Chris Wilder was still Sheffield United manager and he'd made this signing, you'd go, yeah, okay, age. I think he's 29, but he's one of those signings that'll be a 7 out of 10 every week. And if Sheffield United go up, you'll go, it's a brilliant signing from Chris Wilder.
100%. Yeah, funny enough, and I was just looking there because I was in the process of writing it, and I'm going to go back to it when we finish here. an interview with Matt Targett because I'd gone over to Rockcliffe last week to interview him, and talk to him about the injury thing, talk to him about the South Korea thing as well in the summer, which I'm sure you saw, which was bonkers, and fake, obviously, because even now you're still seeing on socials people who are picking it up. But perception is so hard to shift in football, isn't it? And there might be this perception that Matt Targett has had a rotten time with injuries. Well, he did have a rotten year or so, a rotten 18 months with injuries. But there is a difference between having a couple of serious injuries and being injury prone. And Matt Targett absolutely hasn't been injury prone. First things first, when Newcastle signed Targett from Aston Villa, it was initially a loan, and he was really, really impressive and really important in the season that Newcastle stayed up, obviously, when Eddie Howe first went in there after takeover. And then they signed him for £15 million, and he was an important player then as well. Then he got a little injury, and this is at a time when Newcastle were flying. They exceeded all expectations that season, didn't they? And finishing fourth, I think it was, and qualifying for the Champions League. Really, his rotten luck started in a cup game at Man United when he ruptured his hamstring, and then had 4 months out, came back, and as is so often the case, ask Darragh Lenihan, after coming back from a serious injury, the knock-on effect is suffering one more injury or another setback. And he suffered a slight tear of his Achilles, another 4 months out. Since then, he hasn't really had any serious injuries, any minor injuries, other than the eczema flare-up, when he couldn't train because the medication he was taking was because of anti-doping regulations. He wasn't allowed to train. But he said, I was fit for just about, take that eczema flare-up out of things. I was fit last season. The problem he had then is you've got Lewis Hall, who's probably England's best left back. And beyond that, you've got Tino Livramento, Kieran Trippier, and Dan Burn, who can all and have all played at left back for Newcastle. He doesn't stand a chance of getting into that team as much as Eddie Howe rates him, and he does rate him. I sat in Howe press conferences on countless occasions last season when he talked positively about him. So there was an acknowledgement from Targett, I think, this summer that he had to go out and play. Like you say, he's 29. It's not like he's 33 or 34. And he said last week, I feel like I've got to make up for lost time. I've lost 2 years of my career, essentially.
Yeah.
I think regardless of whether it's Boro or elsewhere, Boro can only benefit from the fact he's out of contract next summer, and he comes to Boro playing for his future, whether that's at Boro or elsewhere. He comes to Boro playing for his contract because he knows he's not going to play another game for Newcastle. And he had a full pre-season. He's fully fit. I think we saw that from the fact he was able to go straight in from the bench against Sheffield United on Saturday and had an impact. Again, like Brown, I think that could turn out to be a really smart signing. And it gives Boro the option to revisit the Max Arfs and stuff down the line. We know that they really wanted him. Columbus Crew didn't want to play ball this summer. That's not to say they're not going to in the future. Look at the Strellik situation. So it just gives Boro the option to assess that again, be it in January, be it next summer. Puts them in a position of strength, really, on all fronts there.
Yeah, I think with the Arfston situation, as you say, by all accounts, it seems like one that, like Strellik, they would probably quite like to revisit. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. You've got, as you say, Sammy Silvera that's kind of made his way back into the Australia squad, playing as a left wing back. But then you've also now got, and it just goes to show the strength of the squad now that Matt Targett, perhaps a little bit fortunately, Sammy Silvera completely battered and bruised in that first half against Sheffield United. I don't know how he made it to half time, to be truthfully honest, but one injury, and you're not now looking at the bench and thinking, well, he could do a job there, or, we might have to shift things or shuffle the pack a little bit. You're thinking straight away, Matt Targett comes on, makes an immediate impact. And like you say, you mentioned the Gary Monk squad. I always remember how much of a big deal that Aitor Karanka used to make about having two players for every position.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think possibly right wing back, okay, you've got Silvera that could probably do a job there. Luke Ayling in an absolute must, but you certainly wouldn't want to be moving him right now in terms of his performance level as that right-sided centre half. But it does, and like we'll move on to now, Cali Sen, again, complete different profile, different stage of his career, but this feels more so a Latte Laugh or a Rav Vandenberg, a little bit of a Kieran Scott gamble for a relatively low fee, with very high upside. And to be honest, okay, yes, I'm sure you could pick out a few, but Middlesbrough have been quite good at basically, as I say, getting someone in for a relatively low fee that no one else was. Look, I'm sure a lot of European clubs were aware of Kalisen, but doing a deal with one eye on the future and thinking if we can get this right, or if he can, rediscover his form that he showed, he's in the Juventus youth setup. It's going to benefit Boro that you're going to get a lot of good years out of this player, but also with one eye on and I know people kind of want to punch the screen in sometimes when the likes of yourselves, me and Nathan talk about the buzzword, the model. But in terms of the model, it's one that fits that certainly, but also as I was discussing, it seems like one that fits into that category of something that Borough have done very well over the last few years, especially generating those funds that they've been able to over the last few years.
It's low risk, high reward, isn't it? And I think the beauty of bringing Strellik in and having Conway already there is the pressure isn't really there on any of them. With Strellik, they can ease the way in. I think from what we saw of Kalisen on Saturday, he's not going to be the type to ease the way in. I think he's going to want to be straight into the heart of things. And just quickly, I think the fact that Edwards was able to put him straight in, 24 hours after he signed, straight on the bench and straight in, shows that that back to that alignment that we were talking about. Because he's a good fit, he's going to have to get up to speed with exactly what Edwards wants. But because he's a good fit for the style, for the type of player, and for the system, then it's a pretty seamless move for him and a seamless shift to adjust to. But yeah, clearly the hope would be that Kalisen is going to come in and fire Boro to promotion and end up playing Premier League football with Boro. But if he doesn't, if Boro don't go up, if Boro aren't successful this year in terms of winning promotion, but Kalisen scores, or impresses like Emmanuel Lat does, then Boro will obviously benefit financially down the line. There's a feel with both Strellich and Sen that they're both 24 and that they're getting them at the right time, at the start of the curve. They should really just be coming into their peak years. And you only have to look back at Sen's start. Is it the Golden Boy nomination? I forget which is obviously the award recognised for the brightest young talent in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can't remember what year it was. It might have been 2020, 2021, when Sen was one of the 100 nominees. Now, I know 100 is a lot of players, but me or you weren't on that list. You're clearly an incredibly talented player to be in there. I think Erling Haaland won the award that year. So there's no doubt in the quality. As always with these players, you never truly know how they're going to adjust to the championship and adjust to the culture and adjust to the club and settle in. But more than enough homework and research and background work is done on the character of these players, as well as the football ability, obviously. And the feeling is that Sen is going to be a good fit on and off the pitch. So yeah, I think that looks like another encouraging one. And even from the cameo we saw on Saturday, you can already see he's a different type of player than Conway, isn't he? And he's going to offer Boro a little bit of something different. I mean, straight away you look at him and think, not that he's going to be a 20-minute substitute week in, week out, but if you were a tired centre half and you saw him coming on, you'd think, oh God, I could do without this.
Yeah. Even I think what impressed me, and almost similarly to Bergsorg in a sense, and I know the kind of final 10-20 minutes of the Sheffield United game, it was a case of,
I mean, he should be Boro's top scorer now.
yeah. I'm starting to think that he's just kind of getting these little skills in there, a few ball rolls, getting his clips for Instagram, and then the actual final goal bit, he's just going, nah, it's fine. But in terms of getting in A positions, but also, as you say, in terms of different game situations that he's going to be introduced into, at least at the beginning. I'm sure he won't just settle for, as you've said, a place for the last 20 minutes or someone to come and close out a lead, but real sort of maturity in a sense of, there was a few, I think there was one actually where he had a Sheffield United defender hanging off his back, and it was never kind of nail-biting stuff against Sheffield United for the last sort of 10, 20 minutes. But, a one-goal advantage, and he's got a Sheffield United defender hanging off his back, and he could easily try and sort of dummy the ball, knock it round the corner and run the channel. He holds the defender off, lays Aidan Morris. Aidan Morris goes through, and then the move breaks down. But there was a real sort of maturity, I guess you would call it. And I think what impressed me most, like you say again, throwing someone in on such short notice, it almost felt, yes, he's a little bit, in the nicest way possible, he's a little bit scruffy from what we've seen so far. He's going to bulldoze his way through. He's going to have defenders hanging off him. But as you say, I think, especially in terms of the squad, a very different profile to what Middlesbrough have at the moment. And I think me and Nathan discussed after the first game of the season that there was a fair few longer passes where Tommy Conway almost had his head in the sky as if to say, I'll carry on chasing it, but please get the ball on the floor.
Yeah.
And I think it just gives Boro another option. And I think that's what Middlesbrough have done so well this summer. You've got so many different options, but so many different profiles. And as we'll kind of go on to discuss, I do want to touch on outgoings a little bit, but it's not only been about just quantity and numbers in this squad. There has clearly been an obvious look into what Boro missed last season, what Boro needed in terms of Rob Edwards and his versatility and his open-mindedness in terms of changing formations, changing shapes, that you're going to need different profiles. You're not just going to need numbers. You're going to need the likes of Brown that can play 2 or 3 positions. And sometimes people are almost criticised for that. But I think in terms of that attacking line of players, Middlesbrough will definitely benefit from that this season. Just touching on outgoings, and I did mention it before, that buzzword again, the model. Of course, with Boro's signings and the way that they operate now, there is always going to be outgoings, and over the last few windows, we've seen fairly high profile ones at that. Of course, the major bonus for Middlesbrough is the fact that Hayden Hackney's still at the club. But in terms of Rav van den Berg, Finn Azaz, I think it's probably a point that's been discussed. I know you discussed it on your podcast. People have probably spoken to the friends about it. You see views on social media. If at the start of the summer anyone had said, right, 3 of Boro's prized assets, 2 of them can go, 1 of them can stay. And of course, you've got to factor in that Hayden Hackney, Middlesbrough accepted an offer for him. So it could have been very different. Hackney was the one that said no. But in terms of the model, if I want to refer back to that, it's allowed from Latilaf fees, it's put Boro in a position where, yes, Hayden Hackney said no to Ipswich, but it's allowed them to not be in a state of panic where they haven't had to sell all 3. And I think, again, it just goes to show the process of selling players. There has been a change this summer, at least, where you felt, I don't think all of them are going to go. It might be 1, it might be 2, but because of the financial situation, and again, previous sales and previous windows, and also not being pushovers and getting good money for the likes of Azaz, Rav van den Berg, has put Boro in a really healthy position in that sense as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the big thing with Van den Berg and Azaz, and the obvious thing, is they wanted to go.
Yeah.
They both wanted to go. They were both pushing to go. Neither of them were doing an Alexander Isak. And, it never got anywhere near that. But they made it clear that they wanted to move on this summer. And the deals for both, given the circumstances, given in Van den Berg's case as well, he didn't come off a great season. At the start of the summer, I wasn't sure that there was going to be a market for Van den Berg, just because I thought you were shopping more on potential than product from last season. I thought you had a poor season last season. There are mitigating circumstances, obviously, but we know what Van den Berg's capable of, and I think that was a good deal for Boro. And Azaz was desperate to leave. There's no kind of dressing around that, really. He wanted to leave. Boro have made a 12.5 million pound profit in 18 months, and they've replaced. And I think the thing is here, I mean, you talked about the model there. Key in making this work is, accepting that clubs have to be good sellers, don't they? Look at Chelsea and Liverpool this year. Liverpool have got £25 million for Ben Doak. Chelsea have sold players for mega money who I've never heard of or never seen him play for them. You've got to be good sellers, especially in the Championship. And I think Boro have done that really well. It's not a lack of ambition. It's the reality of being in the Championship. But to make that work, you've got to have replacements in place. Finazaz came in the same window that Morgan Rogers left. He wasn't a replacement because the feeling at that stage wasn't that Rogers was going to go, but he ended up being the direct replacement in terms of the position and the pitch they were playing. And now we might be looking at 18 months down the line and say, well, Sonty Janssen came in that summer, or Sverre Nipan came in that summer. And by having him for a year, it gave you the opportunity to get a targeted next summer who, we don't know of now, but the recruitment team have been working on and watching closely for the last 6 or 7 months. So I think that makes good business. And the other thing is, neither of those sales have left Boro short. Rob Edwards has loads of attacking options, and such is the position they're in at central defence, they've signed Adolson Malandra and allowed him to stay in MLS until January, which was clearly key to making that deal happen. And by the way, there's real excitement about that one, real delight at getting that one done. And I think that's another significant fee, which tells you what they think there. So I think they're both good signings. And I think clearly we all know that keeping Hackney was important, but Chris Jones, Boro's head of recruitment, put a post on X, close of play Monday, when there was a picture of him with Strellik, talked about the signings that had come in, but also said, we've also managed to keep hold of Hayden Hackney. It is lost on nobody at all just how important it is to keep Hackney. Because, as we've said already in this video, in this pod, there isn't a better midfield pair. It is. That's not biased. That's not us sitting here and watching Boro. How isn't Aidan Morris in the USA squad? I think it's a good thing for Boro that he's not, but bizarre that he's not. But Morris and Hackney in the Championship,
I watch. There was the Wolves' interest in Hackney. I don't think it ever kind of got to anything. I think it remained.
There was no Premier League.
It remained the case that Ipswich was the only actual concrete offer. But you certainly look at some of the midfields in the Premier League, and okay, yes, a lot of midfielders in the Premier League, for even the lower sides, there's one or two stars in there. That's just the way that the Premier League is now. But you certainly think in terms of the next midfielder or the one that could even go in and replace. I mean, I've had this conversation with, not that I ever wanted him to leave, of course, but I've had this conversation with multiple people, and you look at the mess that Man United are in now, and you think, in terms of a midfielder, I know there's a bit of a conversation about, why haven't Premier League clubs come and firmed up their interest in Hayden Hackney? And there was the comparisons with Joe Bellingham. I think obviously there's the physical aspect and the physical profile, the way football's going. My argument to that would be, I look at Adam Wharton, and he's certainly not going around the pitch bashing people up. Hayden Hackney, I look at Manchester United referring back to that, and I think it wouldn't surprise me, and I hope Middlesbrough go on and get promoted, and he has a season with Middlesbrough in the Premier League, and then, goes on for his own career and plays for whoever, a top Premier League club. But I honestly believe there's a world in which Hayden Hackney will have another superb season for Middlesbrough. He'll then get a Premier League move to a sort of middle of the pack or lower Premier League club. And then in 2 years' time, you'll see Manchester United bid 70 million for him. It baffles me as to why they don't cut out the middleman, so to speak, and spend that, because let's be honest, the fee that Ipswich had agreed, and I'm sure there would have been a premium if it had come later in the window or was from a Premier League club, but you won't, even with Morris as well, who arguably has probably been on par, if not better than Hackney already this season. And you think some of these Premier League clubs, again, I certainly didn't want either to go, but you think Middlesbrough have done so incredibly well to keep both of them, and if they can keep them two fit all season, then that midfield alone will put them in a good position at the end of the season.
You feel like you can shout about it now because the window's gone, but I can't believe there wasn't interest in Morris. I say interest because from what I gather, and there might have been that I'm just not aware of, it certainly didn't get out there. But as I say, that there was nothing that I was ever made aware of that there was interest there. You mentioned Bellingham there. I mean, obviously we watched a lot of Sunderland last season. I don't think there's much between Hackney and Bellingham at all. I think it's a toss-up on any given day, really, as to who has been more effective, more eye-catching, has a better game on that day. Both really confident, progressive players, positive players, both fast improving. I wasn't at all surprised by Bellingham's move because A, he's a class act, and B, like, with no disrespect to him, but his surname's Bellingham. That obviously brought the added interest. But yeah, I agree with you. Man United, Hackney, absolutely seen that being realistic. I think if Wharton had left Palace, Hackney would have been an ideal profile to go in there and replace him. I think the thing now is, if you're Boro, you're saying to Hackney, you can, I remember speaking to Hackney at Rockcliffe last year where we talked about going up with Boro, and he said that's my dream, to win promotion with my hometown club would be my dream. And Dale Fry still talks about it. Now, Dale was a kid when Boro went up the first time, and he was a bit part player at that stage, wasn't he? But he'll still say that's his career highlight. Going up with your hometown club, playing in the Premier League for your hometown club, nothing beats that, does it? And there's a chance that that'll happen this year. Now we look at it and say Boro have every chance of being contenders this season. I'm not saying they're going to get to 100 points because we're at maximum points so far, but I think now expectations, hopes have already changed from the start of the season for many. But yeah, now I think the message to Hackney can be, you can be the driving force for your hometown club and become a hero in what can become a season to remember, a season that's still being talked about for years and years to come. That's not a case. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. Boro have
Yeah,
got 12 points out of 12. It's a possibility.
it's certainly an appealing one, and just on that Dale Fry conversation that you mentioned, I did think it was interesting. It may have been last week or the week before. Borough put a video on their socials of because of the anniversary of the Riverside. What's your favourite Riverside memory? And it was kind of, you almost forget because of what he's developed into and all of the Premier League clubs that are credited with an interest. You've got European clubs, Porto placing bids for him. That actually he's just like me or you, really. He's a Middlesbrough fan. He's straight away said Stawani goal. I mean,
Yeah.
Hayden Hackney himself has scored goals at the Riverside, led his team out of the tunnel, and he still said, no, Christian Stawani scoring against Brighton. And you think it's so appealing. Yes, of course, he'll have his own aspirations and his own goals, but if he could kind of drive Middlesbrough on into the Premier League, that would be, for him and everyone of a Middlesbrough perspective, such an amazing story. Just on further outgoings before we kind of just look at the window as a whole, really, a couple of interesting ones, and I think one that took me by surprise in terms of how many people were disappointed or just in general couldn't quite wrap their head around it. Neto Borges to Bristol City was in that sort of awkward position when Rob Edwards come into the club, where is his best position as a left back or a centre back or as a left wing back. He's gone on loan to Bristol City for the season. I think in terms of the other exits, you look at the Barlasser one, the Force one, they're in a position with their contracts where actually they've probably kicked the final ball for Middlesbrough. That's going to be that. I think with Borges and McCabe again is a slightly different one because there's obviously one eye on the future, and I think for all parties that works, and I think everyone would agree with that. I was a little bit surprised that I don't know if you sort of saw that reaction as well with Neto Borges. I personally think, in terms of you've got Malanda to come, you've got Edmondson back in the fold, Lenahan as well. It does make sense, but a lot of people were very, very unhappy about this one.
There were, and I was slightly surprised. I wasn't. I think Borges cared, and that matters a lot to Teessiders, doesn't it? To Borough fans, and
Yeah.
I don't mean that. I mean that. I think that's a good thing. I think that's absolutely a good thing. I've always said at Borough, a crunching tackle. There have been times when a crunching tackle is celebrated as much as a goal, doesn't it? We love players who are proud to wear the shirt, who kind of fall in love with the club, fall in love with the town if they're not from Borough, obviously, like Dale and Hayden that we were talking about. That game at Bristol City last year was transformative for Neto Borges because in an instant he went from being like a really underwhelming signing to being someone who actually like really deeply cares that Boro were underachieving when he stood there and was consoled by Michael Carrick after the defeat. And he improved dramatically from there on in, didn't he? As a left back, and then at left centre half when he moved over to play at centre half when Boro were playing everyone other than defenders in defence
Yeah,
because of the injury
yeah. I
crisis.
mean, he was rushed back, wasn't he, for the Coventry game as
Yeah.
part of, ironically enough, a Borough back five on the day, or at least started that way. But yeah, as the left-sided centre back, as you say, he had become through the Bristol City, and again, irony in the fact that that's the club that he's gone and joined.
Mm.
But he had become a bit of a cult figure, really.
Yeah, but I think the reality is he was not a left wing back. I don't think it's a case of just saying Rob Edwards doesn't see him as a fit. I don't think he is. We saw enough of him last season. He's a
Yeah,
left back. He's a left back, isn't he? And you know, when you look back, he's actually had success in his earlier in his career, both from an offensive point of view as well as defensively. But he never looked like a real attacking outlet at Borough. He always looked like a solid left back, a solid defender. He wasn't a left wing back. He was never going to play a left wing back for Borough. The fact Sammy Silvera was playing there ahead of him tells you everything. And the reality is, he was sixth choice central defender with Adilson Malanda to join in January. Luke Aylins had a brilliant start to the season. You know, if you'd have asked me a couple of months ago, I would have foreseen Ayling perhaps being in a position that Borges was in, where he was down the pecking order. He wasn't going to feature much. I know he offers an awful lot as a leader and a big character, but Ayling's not. Ayling doesn't want to be at the stage of his career where he's just a dressing room cheerleader. He'll clearly still feel he has an awful lot more to offer, and he's shown that. I think Ayling's been class in the
yeah,
first few weeks of the season. And now Lenihan and Edmondson are back, but they're going to have to bide the time, aren't they? You can't drop Ayling as things stand. So Edwards has high hopes for Lenihan. That much is clear. He has talked about him unprompted in press conference. He was waxing lyrical about him at Rockcliffe last week when we asked about him coming back, and did so again after the game. We've got some quotes from Edwards on Lenihan coming out before the end of the week. So there's clearly high hopes for Lenihan moving forward. But Borges wasn't going to play any football. That's before Malanda comes in, who Borough are really excited about, as I talked about. Borges is 28-year-old. It suits everyone at that stage for him to go out and play. And for all, when Borough sanctioned the exit of Clark in January, and Carrick responded to the question from Craig at the Gazette, you know, are you going to buy another defender? No, we'll be all right. And straight away you thought, oh no, this
yeah.
could be one of those moments. And so it proved. I don't think, you know, I hope I'm not proved wrong. I don't think there is very, very little chance, I think, of us getting 2 months down the line and saying, oh, Borough made a mistake by letting Borges go. You would have to be desperately unfortunate between now and January with injuries or suspensions or whatever to be left short at the back. So I think it makes sense. We're also in a case where Borough had to trim the squad. They had more numbers than what the squad regulations allow, so they had to trim the squad of senior players. We knew Force was going to go. I think in an ideal world, someone like Gilbert would have benefited from a move. Hamilton, the indications to me very early on deadline day was that he was always going to stay. Well, what I don't know is whether that was because there wasn't interest there, or Borough just felt he was better served learning and getting the grips and under the tutelage of Edwards and the coaching staff. But yeah, I think the Borges one, I was slightly surprised by the response, but I think the Borges one makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think just moving on to something that we touched on a little bit earlier, actually, in terms of Borough's transfer window, and that there's been questions about, is this Borough's best window in recent memory? I think it's always difficult to judge a window when, everyone's excited about Strellik, but we've not seen him play in English football yet. I think in terms of, as I say, what we touched on earlier, is there really now, other than right wing back, where I think you can look at Silvera who would do a job there? Is there actually any position in this squad where you look at and go, that's an obvious weakness? Because I honestly don't think there is.
No, I don't think so. And I mean, one of the appealing factors with Callum Britton was the fact he's so durable and reliable and consistent. And touch wood, that doesn't mean he's going to get injured in the next few weeks. But he can play week in, week out. I saw Alan Brown cover there for Sunderland. He'd be fine there. Silvera could play there. Ayling could move over if needs be. But elsewhere, centre half we've just talked about. Central midfield, you've got the obvious two: Brown, Kante, Nipan, who's just as absolutely just as effective as an 8 or a 10. Attacking midfield, you're well stocked. Loads of options there. That's before we get McGree back, and then centre forward, you've obviously got the three. So I don't think so. I mean, in terms of judging the window, like I thought last summer's window was hugely impressive, which is why, and Boro got a lot of their business done early, which is why I think last season was so disappointing. I've said this again and again. At the start of the season, I did not consider the possibility of Boro not finishing in the top 6 last season.
I think you and a lot of
Yeah,
supporters had the exact same. It almost feels like when you look back at last season now that actually well, it would definitely be fair to say January almost derailed the season. And I think that's an interesting dynamic actually in terms of just expectations, the rapport between supporters and the club. I don't think it would be overstepping the mark to say that actually going into this summer, and especially during that month-long period, I think it was, where there was no arrival at Borough, there was an element of trust that had been lost, which is, to me, I was always very much of the opinion of, I think that's a little bit harsh given that, we've signed Morgan Rogers, we've signed Emmanuel Lailaf, Rav van den Berg. There's so many success stories. But I do think January, because of how much, and obviously Michael Carrick played his part, but because of how much you talk about expectations from where it was at the beginning of last season to where the season ended on a really sour note at Coventry. And January had such an impact that going into this summer, the trust had gone a little bit, or they'd been a little bit lost for sure. This transfer window has restored that by, I don't know how many percent or whatever way you want to look at it. For me, I think, but from a lot of people as well, I think interestingly, in terms of when you talk about perspective and expectations, it's certainly gone a long way to repairing that dynamic between supporters and trust in the club. But actually, in terms of Borough's goals, expectations, how much has it changed? Of course, the 4 wins will have helped, and it's only 4 wins. It's a great start, but that's all it is. But in terms of the way you look at the squad now, I think I now look at Borough's squad and think it would be a real disappointment if they aren't, at the very least, challenging for that top 6.
Scott Wilson, my colleague at the Echo, said the same on our pod this week. He said it would now feel like a disappointment if Boro didn't finish in the top 6, which I think, but you put that statement against the backdrop of all the predictions, which I couldn't believe, by the way, about Boro finishing like 15th, 16th,
Yeah,
17th, because where I was bewildered, and there's a few strands to this, but Michael Carrick lost his job essentially, effectively, because he was judged to have underachieved in finishing 10th last season with that squad. Well, the squad wasn't too dissimilar. That squad wasn't too dissimilar to the one Rob Edwards had when I know signings hadn't been made, but Boro had only lost Van den Berg at that time, when people were predicting that Boro were going to finish, lower mid-table. I thought at that time, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. I think I said like 7th, 8th to 12th. At that stage felt like way back before Boro made all these signings, felt because I think there's a few strands to it. First of all, just from what Edwards was saying to us, from indications we were getting on and off the record, there was always a calm confidence. There was no panic whatsoever. There was always a feeling that the transfers were going to come. Clearly, it was dependent on a few things. We've seen it with the likes of Malander and Strellik, that deals were going to go late, but then also exits as well, Van den Berg and others. But I think when you look back at last season, clearly the January window didn't help. But I don't think the January transfer window cost Boro a top 6. I think the issues were prevalent throughout the season. How early in the season was Watford away when Boro somehow threw away the points? Norwich away when Boro somehow threw away the points. Those issues were never addressed. Now, losing Latte Lat clearly wasn't helpful. Losing Ben Doak clearly wasn't helpful. But I think the rot had almost set in, and that's a strong word. But on the pitch, I think the rot had set in before that. I don't have the numbers to hand, but I looked into them and trotted them out on several occasions at the end of last season. the run of results wasn't great for Boro before Dork's injury. Now, the Iheanacho signing was a disaster. There's no getting away from that. And come the end of the season, there was a disconnect between the fans and the side. There's absolutely no doubt in that, which I think makes the job that Rob Edwards and the recruitment team has done all the more impressive, really, because when Edwards came in, from everything I'd heard, from all the conversations I had, I thought his communication is going to take care of itself here. He is going to get fans on side with what he says because he is a good talker, and we saw that. I was at the Meet the Staff event at the Riverside when him and Adi Vivasher was class that night, and Harry Watley, who was also really good, had fans eating out the palm of the hands. That's all well and good, but you then need results. You can do all that, but then if you go and lose the first 4 games of the season, what you're saying to a couple of hundred fans at an event at the Riverside does not matter a jot, does it?
No.
So the results were important. By getting those results, and now by getting the squad in place that they have done, it just feels like everything's come together. And when I've said this a few times, but I won't say who it was, but when I came down from the press box into the press room at the Riverside on Saturday, someone said to me, it just feels not a current staff member or anything like that, by the way, not a current squad member, but said there's just a good feel around this place, isn't there? And that's exactly how it feels. Nobody inside the club is getting carried away after 4 games, but you can't ignore that good feeling. And I've said this a few times. I know I kind of don't want to go into Sunderland comparisons too much, but it's very similar to Sunderland's position last year. So Sunderland fans were furious at the end of the previous season when it had been a shambolic campaign. Mike Dodds had ended the season as caretaker manager. Nobody knew who the manager was going to be. Sunderland seemed to have missed out on 4 or 5 targets. And when Labrise came in, there was all the suggestion of, wasn't he number 6 or 7 on the priority list? He just got relegated with Lorient. I think the similarities there between the criticism of Edwards and Luton. But Sunderland then did a great job through various things over the course of the summer of getting fans on board. But then they won games. Then they won games of football. Had a great start of the season, and they used that momentum to get them through in the end, or to certainly use as a springboard that saw them through. Yeah, belief is a powerful thing, isn't it? And I think there's belief on the pitch and in the stands at the minute.
Yeah. And I think just obviously going on from sort of the transfer topic, we've obviously discussed a lot about incomings, outgoings, etc. Just as a whole, really, I think obviously first international break of the season, it's a good chance to, as we say, it's been a great start, but it's just a start. I mean, in terms of how well things have gone, I don't honestly believe that there is one Middlesbrough fan. I'm sure there'll be one that would say, "Oh yeah, I saw all of this coming," but I don't believe there was one that would have said it will go as well as how it has done. It's not only the 4 wins. I think you've had 4 very different kinds of performances. I think actually Borough have got better in every game, which is always a good sign. And I think I've spoken to a few people, and there was very much a. I think when we talk about that disconnect, it was very much a case when Rob Edwards come in that, as always, really, I think you've got to do quite the job to have bad opinions of you as a new head coach when you come in and do your first club media.
Yeah.
Everyone was always going to go, quite impressive. He talks well. And then, as you say,
Michael Beale would disagree, but someone fans would
perhaps,
disagree. But
yeah.
yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I agree. Yeah,
But in terms of the way in which he's conducted himself, both in the press, in the media, with yourselves, but also behind the scenes, and you talk about that belief, by all accounts, again, it does seem that actually the kind of personality that Rob Edwards showed in that event with all the press conferences, obviously everyone watches and tunes in live every Friday it is now, but behind the scenes, it certainly seems like this isn't actually an act. It is very much Rob Edwards. He's got not only supporters but staff around the place. All of the people that fans and supporters don't see, all as you put it, eating out the palm of his hand. He's an infectious character, really. And again, we'll go back to it. 4 wins from 4 is always going to help, but I don't know if you are covering the game on against Sheffield United, but in terms of the atmosphere, even how many times was the atmosphere just completely
Yeah.
slated at points last season? And yet, Borough sit pretty at the top of the league. Nice sunny day, that plays its part. But there certainly seems to be, and sometimes that's all you need. You mentioned Sunderland as an example. There seems to be a real momentum building already.
Yeah, and Edwards was well aware of that disconnect. No, he hasn't said that to me. Nobody said that to me, but I think that's been blatantly obvious from some of the things he said, and also what he's done, and the way he celebrated that Swansea game. I've said this a few times, but the way he celebrated the win, I had a few saying to me, like, was that a bit over the top? You've only beaten Swansea 1-0 on the first game. It took me back to Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool against West Brom after a draw, I'm sure it was, at home to West Brom in the very, very early stages of Klopp's tenure, when he had his players all lined up in front of the Kop and he got slaughtered for it after it. Why are Liverpool players celebrating a draw for West Brom? And the message from Klopp was, I'm not celebrating the result. I think Liverpool equalised late. I'll have to double check this. I should have done, but I'm sure Liverpool equalised late. And Klopp's message was very much that the fans got us over the line. The fans sucked the ball in. The fans got us through, and we're going to need to do this together. And I think that from Edwards early on, the way he celebrated, and you could see the players were a bit hesitant in that first game to join him, maybe to go over the top, because I'm sure some of them were only thinking, hold on, we've only just won the first game of the season. Compare that with Saturday, full time on Saturday, when you've got Fry there, then Nipan, then Bergzorg takes his turn. They're all going to be at it before long, aren't they? And because I think they've all felt it. They have all felt it that we're much stronger together, and I think it is clear that they are together very much at the minute. And like you said, but what's been so impressive is that every win has been different. I didn't give Boro a prayer of getting 6 points at Millwall and Norwich, just because there won't be many teams who get 6 points at Millwall and Norwich. I've said it a few times. I don't think any team will win 3-0 at Millwall,
No.
apart from Boro this season, because that doesn't happen, really. I'd love to go back and see Millwall's heaviest home defeats over the course of the season. There won't be many like that. There are going to be bumps in the road, aren't there? There are going to be setbacks. Boro aren't going to get maximum points this season as much as we'd love it. But there's already been one major setback, losing 4-0 at home to Doncaster. That can dismantle sides. That I looked at that and thought, oh man, like that. That Swansea win now, any of the feel good factors there disappeared. The reaction to that has been excellent, hasn't it? The reaction to that has been great. And I thought it was great at Millwall. Even after the Millwall win, Edwards was still talking about that, wasn't it? What this has told me is actually the Doncaster win was, also the Doncaster defeat was maybe a mindset thing. Well, I had a fan email me before the game on Friday saying this weekend's game will be interesting, because actually for the first time, maybe since that Doncaster game, there's expectation there. Borough may be expected to win. Sheffield United are rock bottom, have had a rotten start to the season. Yeah, Borough responded to that by delivering, I think, the most complete performance of the 4 league games so far.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I think just on that cup performance, it's interesting because in terms of, and I think there will be, I try not to, but I think there will be a lot of, because of the difference in relationship already, I think a lot of, maybe until we're probably 10 or so games in, a lot of what we're seeing now and the good things are going to be compared to Michael Carrick's Middlesbrough last season.
Yeah.
And I draw comparisons, or not comparisons, but I sort of rewind back to Middlesbrough going to Leeds and putting 3 goals past them live on Sky, and everyone
Mm.
going, and as you say, off the back of what was perceived at that point as a really good summer transfer window, and everyone went, tell you what, Borough look decent. If you flip the script and you compare it to Borough's Carabao Cup game this season, there was a real sort of collective, maybe we might have all got ourselves a little bit excited, then this has just put everyone's feet firmly back on the ground. And I think strangely that might actually play into Borough's favour, and it's probably played into Rob Edwards' favour, the fact that actually it's give everyone a real perspective of, and he's always so keen to talk about running stats, sprinting stats. in terms of a mentality shift of where Middlesbrough were, they were labelled pushovers, they were labelled not streetwise. This season, I think honestly, he would probably never ever publicly say this, but I think Rob Edwards, perhaps behind the scenes, might actually end up being delighted that Boro got beat 4-0 on that night and think that was the point in which everyone thought, okay, yeah, you get the Millwall win, and that builds a whole load of belief going to a ground like that. But actually, all of the buy-in from supporters and players alike, if you run that extra yard or if you continue chanting, it all works cohesion again together. And of course, it's the players on the pitch, but it does feel like if all of that comes together, that actually Rob Edwards, as well as all of his backroom staff, and as you say, I think that's definitely helped already. You're seeing changes in games and early changes in games, but actually, it could be very much a case of that this season was almost kick-started, strangely enough, by that 4-0 defeat.
Yeah, because the Swansea performance wasn't great before
No,
that, was it?
no, it
But it got
wasn't.
over the line because of a set piece. There was loads of positives to come from that. The fact they won with a set piece, the fact they won, the fact they kept a clean sheet and managed the game so well. But yeah, they have got better with every game. That's the encouraging thing, I think. And the other encouraging thing is Edwards and the players keep saying, Aidan Morris said it in that great interview with BBC Tees after the game on Saturday, there's loads more to come. There's loads more to come, especially from an attack. The feeling seems to be there's loads more to come, especially from an attacking sense. But I actually think Boro have tightened up at the back. But I think the balance has been good. I mean, on Saturday, some of the attacking play was great. They could and should have scored a few more goals. But I think Edwards deserves immense credit for getting that game management improved straight away, tightening them up, making them stronger. Those were the issues that plagued Boro again and again and again last season, and there has been an immediate and dramatic improvement there, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've been going for about an hour now, so I am wary. I don't want to keep you for any longer. I'm sure you're just recovering from the transfer window and your sleep patterns just on the mend now. Just finally, obviously, in terms of your perspective on things, obviously very different as someone that covers Middlesbrough, going to press conferences, speaking to a head coach. Michael Carrick to Rob Edwards are almost polar opposite. Michael Carrick never wanted to give anything away. And don't get me wrong, I'm not using it as a stick to beat him with, because when Boro went on that amazing run with Archer and Akpom, everyone said he's so level-headed. He just
Yeah,
kind of sets the expectations. Towards the back end of last season, it was flipped as he doesn't give anything away. There's no rapport there. There's no connection between him and the fans. As a reporter, as a journalist, I imagine you're very much enjoying Rob Edwards and his openness and his charisma and everything that the way he conducts himself, really.
yeah. I think Edwards has been a bit of breath of fresh air, really, and that's absolutely nothing against Carrick and nothing against him as a bloke, because I think it was, you know, re- from everything I hear, really personable fella. And I went to a couple of the on the road events at the end of last year, and the first one, which I think was at the Beechwood and Easter side, and I thought Carrick was great that night. Really good, really personable, funny, quick-witted, and I came away from that thinking, actually, I think you benefit from being a bit more like that in press conferences and maybe letting fans see that side of you, because he was never ever rude in press conferences. It was never anything like Gordon Strachan's press conferences or anything like that. It was never dislikable, absolutely not. But I just think maybe that Man United upbringing, maybe the Man United background, where he just didn't want to give anything away. And there was times when you asked a question that I thought would be beneficial from him answering it in a certain way, and even then, his instinctive response was not to give anything away on a certain subject. Injuries was a running joke, wasn't it? You'd get nothing on injuries. Again, I think it'd benefit him if he'd have said maybe on certain things at certain times, look, X player is going to be out for 6 weeks. And then you're not getting us going and asking about him again the next week and the next week and the next week. But like you say, when Boro were winning week in, week out, and when Boro were playing like the best football I can remember at the Riverside for a fair old while in that first year under Carrick. Boro should have gone up that first year. They were a brilliant side, weren't they? There was a chunk in the second half of that season where, without doubt, Boro were the best team in the division.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and there was no problem then with Carrick's press conferences, was there? But Edwards has been great, like breath of fresh air, really personable. From what I gather, he's exactly the same behind the scenes as what we see. There's a real steely side, I'm told. If he doesn't like something, he will absolutely say it. There's a ruthlessness there. Like Costa is, he's managing the Premier League. You have to have that side of you. But I think as well there's a real social intelligence and really good man management skills. And I think he's benefited already from his communication. I think he's benefited already from the way he talks, from what he said, from the way he's got fans on board. I think right from day one, he knew what he was stepping into in terms of the area and the fan base, and he got it. And I think in a town like Middlesbrough, I think for all the three northeast clubs, I think that's massive. It is different up here, isn't it?
Yeah.
The vast majority of kids will support their local teams. I know we see, Man City or Chelsea or whatever else shirts, but I want my two boys to grow up supporting Borough, to grow up supporting the hometown team, and I think the three northeast clubs are like that. I think Edwards came in with Watling and Vivash. I think they were really clever appointments. Vivash especially. You don't hear a bad word said about him, do you? I think Carrick would have benefited enormously from having someone like that, and that's nothing against the staff, because I think Woodgate gets an unfair bad rep. But I think Carrick would have benefited enormously from having a more experienced figure there at the end of last season. Just a fresh pair of eyes. But I think Edwards' coaching appointments has been really shrewd as well. And so far, as you say, it's early days. So far, like everything he's touched has turned to gold, hasn't it?
Yeah.
That's not an exaggeration. We're
Yeah.
at top of the table with
You
maximum points,
you
other
could.
than that Doncaster game, which, as you
Yeah.
say, I agree. I think down the line we might end up looking at that and think, actually, that was a painful night, but a beneficial one in the long run.
Yeah, I was actually just about to say, just to finish, and I think other than you pretty much answered my question actually, but other than that Doncaster performance and that evening, could this season have genuinely started better? I'm not so sure it could have, to be honest.
Well, there's no, we're not looking at any transfers and saying, man, if Borough had just managed to get that. Like, imagine if Borough had signed all those players and managed to keep hold of Hayden Hackney. Well, they did. Like, imagine if Borough had signed Senate and got Strellik on top of that. Well, they did. Like, so there's no areas of the squad really. But I know we've talked about right wing back there, but I haven't had any conversations where it's saying like, where anyone said Borough's transfer window would have been perfect had they managed to bring in cover at right wing back.
It would be very harsh,
They
yeah.
are absolutely clutching at straws there, aren't we? And on the pitch, are we going to moan about the one goal they conceded at Norwich? Because that's the only blemish in the league so far, isn't it? So, yeah, Doncaster, we've talked about that. But from a championship perspective, it has been a perfect start. And I think they'll win at Preston. That's a dangerous
That is
mindset,
that is a
isn't it? I know.
dangerous ground to get
And
into, yeah.
Preston is a rotten place for Borough, isn't it, when you look at the past record? But I fancy Borough to win there. I really do.
Well, it will be interesting to see. I mean, hopefully they do continue this. I think Sunderland started with 4 wins last season. I don't know if they got to 5. And to be honest, again, maybe I should have researched a little bit better. I can't remember Borough ever starting a season. It will definitely be before I was born
So I
that
think
they
it was
won five
Robbo. I
games.
think it was 94, 95, Robson. I actually
Yeah.
think he might have done the year before that as well, Lenny. But Robbo, Brian, I'm sure that Robson, was Robson 3? No, I'm sure Robson was 4 as well. That ended with promotion.
Well, hopefully that's the sign. Dom, thank you ever so much for jumping on. I mean, obviously, as any Middlesbrough fan, that I know you probably have had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of messages throughout the transfer window. A big thank you, obviously, for all your coverage during the summer. Denying some of these ridiculous links that seem to come out and breaking numerous stories. Obviously, a lot of good ones, considering how well the transfer window went for Middlesbrough. And obviously, a massive thank you for joining me and taking up, well, for me having you for an hour and 11 minutes we're at now. So I'll leave it there. But thanks again, Dom. And obviously, I'm sure everyone that's listening to this will be aware you can watch Dom on the Northern Echo podcast, You Are My Borough, with Scott Wilson as well. And of course, I'm sure you already all follow Dom on all socials as well. So, yeah, in terms of this podcast, as I always say, please do like and subscribe to the Boropolis one. You can subscribe to both. You don't have to only subscribe to You Are My Borough. But yeah, thanks again, Dom. Thanks again, everyone, for watching and listening. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast.